Since the Catholic religion was every day making greater progress in the country, Francis of Sales was concerned with carrying out the Pope's commission, which was to go and secretly see Theodore of Bèze in order to bring him back into the church. He saw him indeed 4 times in the very city of Geneva. In one of these meetings, which took place with politeness but in moderation, Bèze made him this reply: "You have asked me if one could save one's soul in the church. We are alone, just the 2 of us. I can tell you my true feelings. Yes, I think one can be saved in the church." At another meeting, at which the President Favre was present, he was so shaken that in taking leave of Francis of Sales, whose gentleness had charmed him, he shook his hand and said, raising his eyes to heaven with a great sigh, "If I am not on the good road, I pray God every day in order that out of his infinite mercy he put me there." Francis was hoping to achieve this good work with one more meeting, but he was not in time. His frequent visits had caused some people to be furious in Geneva. He heard that if he came back, they had made up their minds to do away with him, and that Bèze was being observed in such a way as to allow no one any access to him. Moreover, there was here another mystery of iniquity. We saw Theodore de Bèze while he was still young, preceding his apostasy by some sins of Sodom. It seems that even in his old age, he was not completely cured of his passions. The gentleman Dea, sent by Henry IV to Geneva, having made friends with him because of their similarity of character, asked him one day in privacy how a man with a good mind and in such good spirits could have gone off and joined a cult as sad as that of Calvin. Bèze's only reply was to open the door of his cabinet and show a young girl who was looking after him. That is what makes me the most convinced of my religion. He died a little while later, asking for the François de Sales to be there. This satisfaction having been refused him, we are told that he repented having left the Catholic Church and that he retracted his errors. But as he died under the power of the Calvinists, it's difficult to know exactly what the truth of the matter is. So it wasn't, he didn't show the girl to Francis of Sales, it was somebody else. But that was his theological argument. You may have heard of the priest who went to his bishop and said, Your Excellency, I've got a serious theological problem. And the bishop said, "Oh yes? What's her name?" With most priests, it's Punch or Judy. But be careful, cave mulierem. Be careful. Those traps, those honey traps, are so much easier not to get into than once you got into them to try and get out again. They're the devil's own job to get out of, if you get into them. It's so much easier not to get into them. November the 15th may be default day for $62 billion in US loans. As some of you may know, the whole financial system is on the skids because the United States has been living on borrowed money now for 10 years. The United States, from about 20, 30 years ago, having been the greatest creditor nation, everybody owed money to the United States. Now, the United States is the biggest debtor nation because the Americans have been living off they've been living off the dollar. The dollar has got such a reputation that people have been willing to ship goods into the United States while the United States simply ships dollars outwards. As long as the dollar means something, that will work. But if you go on doing it too long, just shipping out paper, or promises to pay, paper, eventually the paper is worth nothing because there's just mountains of paper. You've got all the cars and TV sets, and Japan has got all the paper. So Japan now has mountains of paper. American promises to pay. The problem is that Japan, the banks in Japan are in dead trouble because Japan real estate has collapsed in value. The Japan real estate soared to unreal heights. A square yard of Tokyo cost $1 million. I mean, extraordinary things. I don't know whether, but the land values skyrocketed back about 20, 15, 10 years ago, and since then, in the last 5 years, they've done some serious collapsing. Well, now the problem is that if you take land as collateral for a loan, the bank will lend you money as long as they have control of your land. And if you don't repay the money, they will take your land. Fine. Well, obviously the land has got to have a value proportionate to the money that you're borrowing. The bank is not going to lend you $1 million for a $1,000 piece of land. So you've got to have $1 million piece of land, and then the bank would say, okay, we'll lend you $1 million, but we could take control of your property. And until you hand back the $1 million, we are the owners of your property. Okay? You're borrowing on your land. The land is called a collateral. It's the backing for the loan. Fine. So the banks held all of this real property, which they assumed was worth, say, $1 billion. But if the land and they've lent out $1 billion. But if the land values then collapse, the banks suddenly find they've no longer got $1 billion value on their hands, and all of this money that they've lent out is still hanging out there, and so the money is hanging out against assets which are not worth all the money that's running out there. Therefore, the Japanese banks are in trouble, and they are some of the biggest banks of all. Over the last 20 years, Japanese banks that have become, say, 15 to 18 out of the largest 20 banks in the world are Japanese banks, I think, some very high proportion. Because of all of this money that's been flooding into Japan, because the Japanese have made all these machines that the Americans have bought, and so all that's come back to Japan is paper. Or promises to pay. So Japan now has, the Japanese banks are in real trouble. And since the Japanese banks are the biggest banks of the world, then the world's financial system is in trouble. Now, as long as nobody shakes the ship, and if the land value all went up again, you'd get away with it. The Japanese banks could get away with it if the land values all went up again. And it would be as though nothing happened. As long as nobody's too scared and nobody says boo and nobody blows, the house of cards won't fall down. But if somebody says boo, or if the land values don't go back up again, or if somebody blows, and the whole world financial system today is a house of cards. There is a small but growing risk. Well, this is a problem more strictly internal to the United States, but it's entirely similar. There is a small but growing risk that at 8:30 a.m. on November 15th, the federal government will default on $62 billion in payments that are due to holders of Treasury securities. An unprecedented event that would cause chaos in the world's financial system, according to financial market experts and government officials. That's the moment that computers in the New York Federal Reserve Bank's Operations Center in East Rutherford, New Jersey, are scheduled to begin transferring more than $60 billion from the U.S. Treasury to thousands of financial institutions, which would credit the accounts of large customers. Simultaneously, those computers and others in Richmond and Dallas are supposed to be sending electronic funds transfers of about $1.2 billion from the Treasury to the accounts of about 250,000 individuals and businesses that bought securities from the government under the Treasury Direct Investment Program. These interest payments will average about $2,000 per investor. Altogether, about $25 billion in interest payments are due that day on 57 different issues of Treasury notes and bonds. The American government has been borrowing, because if you're a politician and you deliver the goods without the people having to pay, the people will re-elect you. So if you're, as a politician, give the people something for nothing, you can be sure of being re-elected. If the people are stupid, they will go on electing politicians who give them something for nothing. If the people have any sense, the people say, I don't want something for nothing if the whole thing's going to collapse. If the people are stupid, they will say, I want something for nothing, even if tomorrow it will collapse. Today is today, let tomorrow look after itself. Well, the tomorrow is coming, and the tomorrow is not far off. No one knows for sure what would happen if the fierce budget dispute between President Clinton and Congress led to this default situation. Other than that, investors large and small would not get the money on which they're relying. Many financial analysts and government officials believe they won't find out. They expect some sort of compromise to be struck in time to keep the funds flowing. In other words, don't let the people know just what trouble the whole system is in. Just keep it patched up and another repair job just to keep it on the road another little while. Which simply means that there's going to be a bigger and bigger smash when finally the thing smashes. But they're putting off the smash. Right now, there's a sort of a strong arm between Clinton and the Republicans. The Republicans are trying to get a bit, not very much. Because if the American voters, same with the other nations, the American voters are so dumb, they're so corrupt, that they will not vote in politicians who will want to straighten the whole thing out and pay it all off. Because if they had to pay it off, then the people would suffer. Instead of having a party, the people would start suffering. People don't want to suffer. So they keep putting in power the politicians who will play the game, keep the party going. The party has kept going up till now, but any moment the party comes to an end. As listen to Ruben Montalvo on the subject, because he knows about it. But the media, not a word. If there's a breath of a problem in the media about the Japanese banks, what you will read is Japanese banks officials today met U.S. security officials, U.S. Treasury officials, and when they came out, the U.S. Treasury officials said, everything is simply superb. And then the Japanese official said, no, it isn't, it's even superber. That's what the media are saying. I've stopped taking the Chicago Tribune. It's a waste of time. It's an absolute waste of time. If you want to have any idea what's going on, read some of those good newsletters. And there you've got to sort of take it and leave it some, but something like Criminal Politics will tell you a lot more about what's really going on than 50 of these media put together. They lie. And they're all intent upon keeping this whole great charade and party going for as long as possible. In other words, deceiving as many people as possible for as long as possible. That's what's going on. But the dam is going to crack, and they're going to be able to paper it over and pretend for a little while, but eventually there's going to be a flood. There's going to be a flood. And the whole thing could start unraveling with economics and finance. Mark you, it will not be a bad thing if some financial hardship and people being hit in their pocket will at last begin to waken them up. It's no use hitting people in their Sunday morning religion. They couldn't care two pins. It's all marshmallow anyway. What does it matter if a marshmallow leaks? But you hit them in their pocket. Now that's getting serious. Because we believe in the dollar. So the Lord God has said, you believe in your dollar, just you see how your dollar will do. And it's the dollar's very soon not worth the paper it's printed on. It's gone. It's effectively already gone. But people don't realize it's gone. So the pretense is being kept up for the moment. Many financial analysts and government officials believe that the people won't find out. They expect some sort of compromise to be struck in time to keep the funds flowing over the Fed's wires on schedule so that nobody realizes just what a close shave it was this time, which simply means it's going to be the next time or the time after that. But the brinkmanship involved seems more serious than in past budget disputes, several analysts said. For example, a large majority of Republican members of the House have signed pledges not to vote for an increase in the government's $4.9 trillion debt limit. $4.9 trillion debt limit until Clinton agrees to sweeping cuts in federal spending programs intended to balance the federal budget in 2002. You look at that little Winona paper, and day after day, there's a cartoon saying that, anybody who wants sanity in finances is hurting the old people, is taking food out of the mouths of the little children, is cruel to the babies. Day after day, these stupid cartoons. Because the people, the government, these socialists, these governments have pushed a pacifier into baby's mouth, and the baby is sucking and sucking and sucking. Now somebody wants to pull the pacifier away. Oh, no, keep the baby pacified, keep the baby pacified. Stupid, absolutely stupid. Over the past 2 weeks, a number of Republican senators have been signing similar pledges. In other words, the Republicans, to their credit, are, some of them, trying just to begin to get a little financial sanity into these insane deficits. The United States is bankrupt. Any kind of default of Treasury securities would be disastrous, unquote, said David Torture, director of asset management at Salomon Brothers, Inc. in New York. Conceivably, it, quote, could lead to a collapse of the financial system, unquote, he said. Quote, it would be catastrophic, unquote. That's why a whole lot of people are all agreed to try to keep the thing going for as long as possible, because when it collapses, boy, you're going to see people out on the streets, you're going to see people jumping off buildings, you're going to see people out with guns in the streets looking for someone to kill. Because the dollars in their pocket are going to be worthless, they're just going to be their paper. What worries their bank account? Nothing. The banks will be shut down, the computer paper will all be nothing. It's just going to, the whole thing's just going to evaporate like that. Dr. White says, like Moby Dick. Boom! The whole thing's just gone. Just gone. What worries Torture is that Treasury securities play such a fundamental role in financial markets that such a failure could profoundly damage the markets themselves. A default also would raise future interest rates, not just for the federal government, but for homeowners seeking mortgages. See the line of country? This is one of these characters from New York saying, everybody's going to be hurt if the party comes to a stop, so everybody had better join in pretending that the party can go on forever. Huh? You're all involved, so let's just keep it rolling. It would hurt homeowners seeking mortgages, consumers shopping for new cars, and businesses borrowing to build a new plant or to finance their accounts receivable, according to market experts. These people lie like they breathe. Economists lie. Lie, lie, lie. The value of mutual funds could fall as rising interest rates would drive down bond prices. That's something I don't quite understand. That the interest rates would obviously rise because people wouldn't lend unless they were sure of getting back plenty of money if the money is in question. Interest rates would rise. Why do interest rates rising drive down bond prices? I think it's because to get the same income on your money, you don't. If the rates rise, you don't need to buy so many bonds. I think. I'm not sure.
Well, it's usually because the payments are kind of fixed, and so if you have a higher interest rate, you need less money to get the same payment.
Yes, that's it. That's just what I said. I think that's it. If the interest rates rise, then you need to lay out less capital buying bonds to get the same income back. Because the interest of bonds is you get regular income until the payback of the principal. I think that's it. Even if a default were temporary and caused no long-term increase in their interest rates that Treasury has to pay to borrow money, a major fear of those worried about a default, investors who had to sell mutual fund shares during a market upheaval could incur a substantial loss. The investors have been going into mutual funds in the stock market like crazy for the last 2, 3, 4 years. Mutual funds have just been going up and up and up. The Dow Jones is up at 4,700. The Dow Jones is massaged. It's a figure based on about 30 companies, and when one of the companies begins to not go very well, they pull it out and put back in one that was going well, in order to keep the Dow Jones up, in order to maintain the pretense that everything is just hunky-dory and peachy keen. It's one great lie. In similar fashion, some pension funds could find themselves with losses, particularly if they did not get payments due from Treasury on November the 15th. Torture said some overseas investors who hold about 20% of all Treasury securities, overseas investors, foreigners, own 20% of government loans. That's power over the US government that the US government has handed to other people. Scripture says the creditor controls the debtor. So the US is 1/5 controlled by probably mostly Germans and Japanese. Who hold about 20% of all Treasury securities probably would dump their holdings and in the process cause the value of the dollar to collapse. If the Japanese and the Germans dumped in the United States their paper, which they've been piling up over these years, the dollar would collapse, because the values of all the treasury bonds would collapse, everything would. There are so many commitments at any moment to buy, sell, and swap treasury securities that even a temporary failure to pay interest or principal would, quote, lead to disorders several orders of magnitude greater, unquote, than the disruptions in 1985 when a computer problem at the Bank of New York company disrupted the market for government securities for less than a day. It took weeks for all the parties whose transactions were affected to settle their claims against one another, torture recalled. A treasury default, quote, would be a mess that would take a long time to unwind, unquote. It wouldn't be a loss that they could it wouldn't be a problem that they could unwind. It would start an avalanche, probably. If it didn't start, if a treasury default, which they'll probably get round it. They've already at the end of September was the limit for the 4.9 trillion debt ceiling. Came due on September the 30th. They made an agreement, Clinton and Congress came to a compromise that Congress would be able to go on spending until November the 13th. The next crunch is November the 13th. Then they'll come to another agreement. You'll see. They'll come to another compromise. Yes?
Could it end up like in Brazil, where the whole country is bankrupt, but the banks keep it running because they like that system in which they can keep the country going, but they own everything?
I don't know. The US is in a particular position because it is the main prop of the world financial system, of course. I mean, a country like Brazil can go up or down, and everybody leans on the US. But now it's the US that's in question. That's what's different this time. That's all.
It'd be more likely that they would have a currency recall, print something else that would be, as far as real value, you'd be trading your old dollars for a fifth the cost or something.
A currency recall is on the cards. They've got
everybody would be out, like a third or whatever.
Yeah. A currency recall is on the cards. They've got the new money printed. There are new US dollars printed and ready all over the United States to be distributed. And in criminal politics, it talks about there'll be a double dollar, a foreign dollar which will keep its value, and a domestic dollar which will just circulate inside the United States and which won't be worth very much. And you won't be able, like today, you can take any internal US dollar and use it abroad, but you won't be able to do that then. So that the strong dollar will just be for export, so to speak, and the internal dollar will be much weaker. Lillard?
Aren't the Jews going to be hurt by this? What are we pumping into Israel if the dollar is doing so poorly and where it goes so much? How is it that we're pumping so much money into Israel?
How are we pumping so much money?
If we don't have the money to pump into it. If it's all, so to speak,
How is the United States pumping so much money into Israel when the United States hasn't got the money anyway? What's the answer to that question? Because we know who has total control of the US Congress. The Gentiles have handed themselves over, lock, stock, and barrel, to these people.
No, but even if they have control, if the money's not there, I don't see how even the
they'll come out, which as long as it's financial shenanigans, they will come out smelling of honey at the end of it, smelling of roses at the end of it. Whichever way it falls, they will come out well. Because that's the way they stack it and organize it. You read the protocols and you can see that they've got the total collapse of the Gentile system organized as the prelude to their Messiah taking over the world. That's how they've set it up. And as long as the Gentiles turn their backs on God, that's what's going to happen. Until the Gentiles turn back to God, forget it. Well, Matthew 5. The new law. Let me just give you a game plan for the Sermon on the Mount, which otherwise can seem somewhat higgledy-piggledy. New law. Surpassing the old. The old law of Moses, of course. Founding the new law. And then conclusion. It's not too complicated. And this is mostly St. Thomas, if not, as to happiness. The Beatitudes. That's where the Sermon on the Mount starts, with the Beatitudes. As to the commandments, but I say unto you, for everybody observing new law, for the ministers, then in general and in particular, and that is commandments 5, 9, 6, 2, 1, 3 to 10, 11 to 16, 17 to 20, 21 to 48, and that's chapter 5. Now, founding a new law. God, worldly goods, and neighbor. In general, thanksgiving, prayer, fasting, detachment, summary. Towards God. Prayer. Neighbor. Golden door. Thomas had divided the chapters, instead of that monk in what century? of the 15th century, wasn't it, who divided Scripture into chapters and verses? 14th or 15th century?
Student like
1255, so it's earlier. It's the 13th century. St. Thomas would probably have put those verses in with the previous chapter, according to content. Well, you can catch up with that afterwards if necessary. Seeing the multitudes, he went up into a mountain, and when he was set down, his disciples came unto him. Opening his mouth, he taught them, saying, opening his mouth, an expression meaning that something important is going to be said. He taught them, saying, Blessed are the poor in spirit. This is the first of the 8 Beatitudes. For theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Humility first. I could give you a schema for the Beatitudes, which again is St. Thomas Aquinas. I was on the board for a while. Maybe some of you saw it there. I may yet give it to you, but not for the time, not for the moment. For theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are the meek, for they shall possess the land. The land of the living is heaven. Blessed are the meek, for they shall possess the land. Psalm 36, verse 11. Blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted. Those who mourn for unworldly motives, not for worldly motives. Those who mourn for unworldly motives. Blessed, for instance, today, souls grieving over the state of the church. Not happy those who are smiley, smiley all the time, which is what the world thinks. But happy those who are cry all the time for unworldly motives. Blessed are those who have a right understanding of life and are grieving over the state of the world today, for instance, for the right reasons. For they shall be comforted. 2 Corinthians 7, verse 10. 2 Corinthians 7, verse 10. For the sorrow that is according to God worketh penance, steadfast unto salvation, but the sorrow of the world worketh death. So, blessed those who are afflicted for the right reasons, for godly reasons, because they will God will comfort them. 6, blessed are they that hunger and thirst after justice, for they shall have their fill. Those who ardently desire God's will to prevail in the world and or in themselves. Not blessed are those who accept and rejoice in a corrupt state of affairs, but blessed are those who wish that the world would obey God. Blessed are they that hunger and thirst after justice, for they shall have their fill. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. 7. Blessed are those who practice all corporal and spiritual works of mercy. Blessed are those who practice all corporal and spiritual works of mercy. 8, blessed are the clean of heart, for they shall see God. Cleanness of heart includes, but does not stop at, chastity of body. Cleanness of heart is more than just cleanness of body. Blessed are the clean of heart, for they shall see God. Their appetite is not fogged up, blocked up with earthiness. Therefore, they can see a lot more clearly. It's very true. Blessed are the clean of heart, for they shall see God. Cleanness gives clearness, you could say. Clearness of sight. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. Blessed are those who establish peace around them. Blessed are those who establish peace around them, thereby resembling the God of peace. Thereby resembling the God of peace. There are people who set everybody at war all around them, others who set people at peace. Blessed are they that suffer, 10, persecution for justice' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. For justice' sake, or for my sake, I think it's in verse 11, it's for my sake. Blessed are you when this the same, 10 and 11 is the same. Blessed are you that suffer persecution for justice' sake. Blessed are you when they shall revile you and persecute and speak evil against you untruly for my sake. Be glad and rejoice, your reward is very great in heaven. There's the kingdom of heaven. It's the same. 10 and 11, for justice' sake or for my sake, in other words, not the heretics. Not heretics. Luther was not blessed when he was persecuted. For justice' sake or for my sake excludes the heretics. St. Augustine says, where sound faith or charity are lacking, there can be no justice. Where sound faith and or charity are lacking, there can be no justice. So blessed are souls in the state of grace who are persecuted, but not blessed if they're persecuted in the state of sin. Also not blessed, notice 11, if they persecute you and speak all manner of evil against you truly. If they speak evil against you truly. But our Lord says, if they speak evil against you untruly for my sake. So you're not going to be blessed because your persecutors are going to tell a bunch of truths about you. You'll be blessed to the extent that your persecutors have to tell lies about you. Be glad and rejoice, for your reward is very great in heaven. For so they persecuted the prophets that were before you. As against the Protestants, notice verse 12, reward presupposes merit. The Protestants say that you can't merit, but here, how can there be a reward unless there's merit? So this verse is one of those many verses that proves that there is merit, as against the Protestant doctrine of there being no merit. Kerry?
I just got the quote of St. Augustine.
Yes.
What St. Augustine made, like St. Cyprian, who apparently had some problems on the infallibility of the Pope or something written that described him. And he had, I think it's St. Cyprian, isn't it?
Surely it's material heresy. I mean, it's material error on the part of St. Cyprian. Surely. St. Cyprian hadn't, the church's doctrine on the Pope had not yet become clear for Cyprian to know that he was denying church doctrine if he took the position he was taking.
Well, the funny thing about him is that he first defined it and then denied it.
He may still have thought that he was closer to Catholic truth in his second position than in his first.
But then that doesn't mean exactly
No, it does, because you've got to distinguish between formal error and material error. Let's assume that Cyprian in his second position was in material error. That doesn't block faith or charity. Right? St. Thomas Aquinas did not believe in the Immaculate Conception. Some people try to argue he did. I think it's very difficult to argue. I don't know much about it, but it's very difficult to argue that he did believe in the Immaculate Conception, because all the Dominicans didn't. But they weren't heretics because of that. They were only what's called material heretics, at the very most. Do you understand the difference between formal and material heresy?
Yeah. I was trying to understand what you were talking about sound.
Well, sound formal faith, right? Which is not excluded by material error, all right? Kurtz.
Could you say that he wasn't materially heretic at all? The dogma wasn't defined? He's only materially...
He's not even materially heretic. Described from our point of view today, he's a material heretic because he was holding a position which has turned out since then to be heretic. But to the extent that there was no way then of knowing what the church really thought, that the question still was completely up for grabs. Yes, it was not heresy. It was opinion in a matter of lawful dispute. Well, completely up for grabs, yes. Nevertheless, there have been a number of doctrines down the history of the Church, like the Immaculate Conception, which it is a matter of lawful opinion, but when Mother Church applies herself full force to finding out the truth, and she can establish the truth is there sufficiently for her to be able to find out. But until Mother Church does it, I can't be sure. I can have, these doctors on this side and those doctors on that side, or all the doctors on one side and nobody on the other side. It's only Mother Church that has authority, right? You absolutely need the authority. When you've got great doctors on one side and great doctors on the other, you really don't know. Mother Church, for instance, could apply herself full force to defining in what personality consists, right? In exactly what personality consists. She could, and if Mother Church applied herself with the help of the Holy Ghost, she would find out. Once she found out, the question would be settled. But until then, it really is a matter for lawful disagreement, lawful opinion. And until the Church pronounced, the Immaculate Conception was a question of lawful opinion, because there were very good reasons on one side and on the other, right? So it's up for grabs until the Church pronounces, right? Some questions obviously are more up for grabs than others. Why is the Immaculate Conception particularly up for grabs? Why, might one say, why was it a question that hung fire for 1800 years? Kerry?
I think the effect would be the same. We'll still have our 80 as
Ooh, I think, well, it's a sharp privilege. It sharply increases her standing, so to speak.
that we would never deny him in Thomas.
Shall we?
What is the question of saving the idea that nobody can be saved except by redemption, and then saving our
You
religion?
see, there are strong reasons why I said. I was going to say the reason why I'd say it's a question that's especially up for grabs is because it's so secret, because it's something hidden from view, so to speak. It's a pure decision of God. It's a pure decision of God, and because there are two great principles on each side. One is the purity of the Mother of God and the exclusion of sin from the tabernacle of the Most High for 9 months. And the other principle is nobody's redeemed except by our Lord Jesus Christ. So, you've got two great principles involved, which is why you had doctors on each side, so on. But how those two principles adjusted, only God determined, and only the Church can tell how God determined. Only the Church can know how God determined. Okay. It was a gratuitous privilege. Who can take the measure of God's grace? It's not something that you can measure by nature. There's no way of naturally measuring. There's no natural measure that can tell you the degree of grace in something like such a privilege. That's why I'm thinking it's a particularly disputable point, because it's so purely gratuitous. It's so purely the grace of God. It turns out that God did so honor his mother, but See, apparently, and then the church defined that does not dishonor the Son. That does not punch a hole in the redemption, because it's purely by prevision of the merits of the Son that the privilege was granted. So that saves the second principle. But how those two principles are adjusted, it's very difficult. Almost like grace and free will. It's... All right. Then, verse... reward, priest versus merit. 13. You are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its savor, wherewith shall it be salted? It is good for nothing anymore but to be cast out and to be trodden on by men. Remember that prior to refrigerators, salt was the main way of preserving meat. Now we've got refrigerators, so you can preserve almost anything almost indefinitely. But then it had to be by salt. What else was there than salt? What else was there?
Onions.
Onions would do it? Yes, that could be. I don't know. What else?
Certain spices too.
Certain spices.
Smoke.
Smoke, yes. You had to have something. Or either you had to eat the meat on the spot, or very soon, or you had to have something to preserve it. That's why I used to slaughter the animals and eat them almost immediately. All right, so our Lord is now speaking to his, 11 already. Bless ye when they shall persecute you. He's speaking to his ministers. So, ye are the salt of the earth. It's addressed in particular to his ministers, the priests and apostles. And they are the salt of the earth. A small amount of salt preserves a large amount of meat. A few apostles and priests preserve a large number of people. But woe unto the people if the apostles go corrupt. Woe unto all of that bulk of meat if the little salt is no longer acting like salt. So the comparison, it's a very vivid, very popular, very down-to-earth, very practical comparison. A small, powerful preservative. But if that preservative goes, then corruptio optimi pessima. The corruption of the best will be the worst. If the priests go corrupt, they're fit to be nothing but thrown out and trampled underfoot. That you can see all around you. The other salt of the earth. If the salt loses savour, wherewith shall it be salted? It's good for nothing but to be cast out and to be trodden on by men. Chrysostom says, another interesting point. You may remember St. Thomas Aquinas was once approaching the city of Paris. The city of Paris. And he said, I would give all the city of Paris just for the commentary of Chrysostom on St. Matthew. Said to St. Thomas Aquinas, heresy. I would give all the city of Paris just for the commentary of Chrysostom on Matthew. Chrysostom said, Christ pulls us out of sin. The apostles are to preserve us from the corruption of sin. Christ pulls us out of sin. The apostles are to preserve us, or to keep us out of the corruption of sin. Interesting little point. To underline the preservative nature of the apostles, like salt. You are the light of the world. A city is seated on a mountain and cannot be hid. The light of the world on the hill, the candle on the stick, is the Catholic Church resting on Christ. The light of the world on the hill, the city seated on the mountain, if you like, the candle on the stick is the Catholic Church resting on Christ. St. Augustine says, whoever shuts their eyes to it is blind. Whoever shuts their eyes to it is blind. So let your light shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven. The apostles of Christ must shine forth, not for their glory, but for his. The apostles of Christ must shine forth, not for their glory, but for his.